YouTube stars Rhett and Link walk away from the Christian faith.
Let's talk about that.
Today we are going to be talking about Rhett and Link, kind of pretty big deal YouTubers who recently renounced their Christian faith. So before we get started on that, if you are new to our channel, our goal here is to help you live and share your faith in the everyday places of life. We talk about real issues facing believers in the modern world, and we make videos full of helpful tools and tips that help you be a disciple in the 21st century. So that's what we're doing today. And guys, how are y'all doing?
We're doing good, Abby. For folks that are just joining us, this is take two. We've probably been at this for about 20 minutes now. Yeah. And
dude, it's been an hour. Everyone, it's been an hour.
The tech issues, man, they are very real.
Yeah, but like Abigail said, our whole point in doing this and fighting through tech troubles is because we do want to discuss problems facing believers in the modern world, and some of those are tech related, but others have to do with just the way society views challenges, and so I'm looking forward to today's show because I think we're going to be talking about the role that faith plays in our lives and in our society. So, yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah. So we just dealt with tech issues. None of us swore. It was really good. I think
Good.
We're maintaining our belief system even during awful internet issues. So yes, we are talking about YouTubers today, which is very new to me. So I've had to really learn a lot in the last week or so. Just a little more behind the scenes. About a week ago, Andrew sent out this list of all of these, I guess, clips from Rhett and Link, who are pretty famous for what's the name of their podcast, their YouTube channel again? It's something modern.
Yeah. Well, their YouTube is actually, I think, Rhett and Link, but they have different sub channels. So they have
Good Mythical Morning.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
They also have a video podcast called Ear Biscuits, which is what we listen to quite a bit of in preparation for this show.
Yeah. So I had to do a lot of research just behind the scenes. I listened to all of these on like triple time. So they were talking really, really fast. And I would put my earbuds in while my children were playing, and I would just be listening to these dudes talk. So I just want everyone to know the suffering that I did to prepare.
Yeah, see, my brain's not as fast as Abby's or Andrew's, so 2 times speed was just too much for me. I just couldn't do it. So I had to painstakingly go through it very slow to catch it. So props to you guys for going 2 times speed. I can't do it.
Well, for the ladies out there, I used to watch the show Gilmore Girls, and they talk very, very fast on that show. And so it just prepared me for this. It was good life experience.
Yeah. Well, we do want to talk about Rhett and Link because just earlier this year in January, they came out with a series that they called The Lost Years. And, I had first come across Rhett and Link's stuff probably maybe 6-7 years ago. They do a lot of comedy sketches.
Pretty good.
And were some of the early adopters with YouTube way back in the 2000s. Very popular, very funny. And they have almost 5 million subscribers to their channel, so very influential as well. And they've kind of always been known as clean comedians, family friendly, and also as people of faith. But it was never something that they really talked about. In fact, just going through their videos and their story that they tell. In the Lost Years series that they did back in January and February of this year, you find out that was a very intentional thing, that they wanted to make people laugh.
Yep.
And even though they considered themselves Christians, they did not want that to be an overt part of their show or of their act, of their performances. So they never really talked about faith until this year, when they did this series and began to basically, in a very public way, tell the story of them leaving the faith. And so this is actually something that we wanted to discuss from earlier in this year, and this is our first opportunity to get to do it. But if you haven't heard about who they are, then that is who they are, and it's really why we wanted to respond.
Yeah, and I think in listening to it and going through it, I know that when it first happened in January, there were a lot of articles. There were a lot of people that kind of jumped on the train, so to speak, and did respond as Christians to their sort of breakdown of their faith. And we don't necessarily want to do that today. That's not I mean, I think there's plenty of people that have taken care of that. What we saw when, or at least what I was seeing when I was listening to this, and as even our last podcast that we did on our book review, I think there's just a theme of how we as believers can interact with those who do not have a faith in Jesus. And what we're seeing, and Rhett and Link are a great example of that, is that there is more to it than maybe our usual arguments that we bring to the table. Would that be a fair way to look at it, guys?
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that, Abby. I think that's a good summarization of what's going on and kind of sets the stage and the context. So I agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, we talked about this last week, like you said, Abigail, that we, as disciples and disciple makers, we want to live our faith in the modern day world. Yeah. And, we want to be students of the message. We want to be students of people. And we also want to be students of our cultural moment, the setting that the Lord has placed us in time and in place. And so, this story with Rhett and Link, I think it's a great case study, actually, to actually highlight some of what we talked about last week in the book review on how not to be secular. And we did watch a lot of video in prep for this show. So we're going to basically be walking through the story that Rhett and Link tell. And I think it's relevant because, first of all, this is a public conversation. Like I said, they've got almost 5 million viewers. And so this is kind of the way YouTube works, is they wanted to tell their story in the most public way possible. Anyone in the world virtually could access and listen to their story. We wanted to listen to their story. So in preparation for this show, I actually listened to 5 different videos that they put out, which was a total of over 7.5 hours of content. And as part of that, I knew that Abigail and Lakeith, we weren't all going to watch that 7.5 hours. But so what I did is I went back and tried to take clips from the relevant parts of those 5 episodes, but it was still about an hour and a half of content for you guys. And I know, Keith, you actually listened to 2 full videos, so probably over 3 hours.
I probably got to get 5 hours in, and started doing clips because I was like, oh my goodness. Like you said, Abby, it was a bit much in a good way. Like I'm excited to talk about what they talked about, but it was a lot to take in at one time. Like a couple episodes was like an hour and 40 minutes, and another one was like an hour and 37 minutes.
So when I gave my background so that you guys could feel sorry for me, I think you all noticed that Andrew just went in and was like, no, I did way more. So I lost that pity grab there. So too bad for me. I guess I should have prepared for that.
So one of the clips that we'll play here in a little bit talks about this because, part of what they talk about in their videos, because they did the videos and they did an interview on sort of the fallout of their video of publicly walking away from the Christian faith. And one thing that came up several times was they felt like there were hit pieces that had come from the Christian world, and they anticipated that these hit pieces would come. And I just want to say that that's not our purpose today. And that's something you had mentioned earlier, Abigail, that we're really wanting to talk about this. We wanted to hear the story that they had to tell, but then we wanted to have a chance to respond to it because it is a public conversation that is now out there in the world. But yeah, it's not that we don't want to hear their story and not take it serious. We did take the time to do that. We're not just trying to discount what they said, but to listen to it and then respond as people who still do have faith and who do still see Jesus as being absolutely relevant to our world today. So that's where we're coming from. But I'm going to give a quick sketch overview of their story because we did listen to 7.5 hours. This video is not going to be that long, and we're going to play clips that sort of highlight different parts of their story. But it won't really do it justice. And so let me take a stab at this, and then you guys can fill in the gaps if I leave any. But basically, Rhett and Link grew up in North Carolina in a very culturally Christian area, and their own family dynamics were very supportive of the Christian faith. They grew up in church. They identified as Christians from a very young age, and actually were very dedicated as Christians to their faith. Throughout high school, they talked about how they made a pact not to have sex before marriage, how not to drink and get drunk because they wanted to be positive examples for their fellow students and teenagers. So they really identified as Christians, not just in name, but in their actions. Went off to college at North Carolina State, and again, were involved in a Christian ministry there throughout their 4 years in college. Campus Crusade for Christ, which a lot of our viewers will be familiar with. They were involved, and they were actually leaders within that particular Christian ministry. Graduated, went into their jobs as engineers, but then actually decided to go into full-time ministry with Campus Crusade for Christ. And they did that for 2 years. They were on staff with Crusade. But it seems like, as they told their story, that it was during that period of time that they really began to have some questions about the Christian faith. And that's also kind of the time where they really began to make videos, both during college, but even more so when they were the 2 years that they were in full-time ministry. And they were making these videos to help with training students on how to share their faith. Eventually went off staff, and that's when they really began to pursue full-time careers with YouTube. Ended up eventually moving out to Los Angeles. And there's about a 10-year process there that they go through that led them to the decision that the Christian faith wasn't true, wasn't worth following. And just earlier this year is when they came out and told that story. So that's kind of maybe the 2-minute sketch overview. Anything that I left out there, Abigail?
No, that was a very good synopsis. I think if you're listening to this, we'll show you some clips that we think are worth maybe going into more detail about, but that's a good overview of kind of what we're looking at. Before we get into this, I want to know how you guys felt. Like, Andrew, you did 7.5 hours. Keith did like 2 hours. I did an hour and a half.
I did like 5, Abby. It was brutal. It was good, brutal, but yeah, I was trucking along.
Okay, how did you feel? Like, I want to share how I felt. So let's hear how you felt.
I definitely want to save, some of it, but like, I love that question initially. I was just, as a feeler person with emotions deep down, and it's, it was a little, I ain't gonna say depressing, but just sad. But I will say, disclaimer, I think Rhett and Link are way smarter, than they put off sometimes. I think Rhett kind of burdened me up with hey, I'm really nervous. I'm really I'm almost afraid to do this. But when it was time to go, he was guns a-blazing. So by the end of the video, I was like, all right, you got me a little bit there, but I could see what's going on here. So I think that made me motivated to really to stand for what we believe. So I think that was my biggest feeling.
So my takeaway from it was, as far as how I felt, I actually walked away like really appreciative of them for sharing their story. I thought they were very honest, and maybe we'll talk about this again. I hope we do, because I don't think, to me, that the whole story, which is what this is them telling their story. But the whole story, I don't see it as them losing something. I really see it as them finding themselves. It's the story of how they, the journey they had to take to become the people that they want to be, which is where they're at right now. And so I know a lot of people feel sad about their story, and I guess I didn't necessarily feel that way. I in some ways I appreciated their self-awareness and their willingness to, tell the story as it's unfolded. Now, they told it from their point of view, which we'll get to here momentarily, but I actually really enjoyed it. I know that may sound weird to people, but I thought it was fascinating. It was very interesting.
True.
But of course, we want to respond to it because there are some claims that they made about the faith that we want to respond to. But as far as just their personal story, I was glad that they told it.
Man, we are really a great trio, I just want to say. So just to sum up, Keith felt sad. Andrew enjoyed it. I was mad. No, and to clarify, I was mad at the enemy. I was mad at just falsehood and sin and just how sneaky it is, and just really ticked me off on like a deep level. Anyone who knows me will not be surprised by that. I think we all really just were very much ourselves in those responses, but I really just wanted to start out with that, and I think that's so great. So see, you got 3 different responses. Before we get started, my blood pressure was off the charts. I mean, I would have to get off, like stop listening and then like call someone and then unsuspectingly like go off on a tangent about this. So sorry, friends and family, for having to put up with me this past week. So let's dig into this because it's pretty great. Andrew, I love how you said, that this was really a story of them not losing their faith, but, finding who they were, like really deciding who they wanted to be as humans. I think that's a really great way to look at it. So one of the things that they said over and over again was that it was a deconstruction. I thought was really interesting word choice. And as someone who really cares a lot about words, I thought this is worth talking about. So let's talk about why they would choose deconstruction versus, rejecting Christian faith or any of the other things that maybe we've heard over time.
Yeah, so this is actually pretty common, I guess, in pretty common language for folks who at one time had faith or identified as believers, and then through a process decided that, hey, I no longer believe those things. I no longer want to be identified as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. And I think they would say that deconstruction is the appropriate word because it is a process. And you could say dismantling would be another word that I think would be synonymous with deconstruction. So it's sort of the story of how how they dismantled their faith. And it sounds better than, how I walked away from the faith. Or how I decided no longer to believe in Christianity. So deconstruction, I think, is just it's a nicer term.
It's buzzy too, and it's a powerful word. When you hear deconstructing, it's like, oh wow, deconstruction. It's like, oh, that sounds pretty intense. So I think they had some buzzness there too. So I'm excited to hear some of the clips. We got some cool stuff in store. So
yeah, Abigail, what about you? I know you said words mean a lot to you. You are an author. So what did you think about the choice of that word?
Oh, I agree with Keith. It was a definite buzzword. So it annoyed me because I feel like deconstructing kind of gives off the vibe that if the rest of us just took our faith apart and like really looked at what it was made of, then we too would come to the same conclusion. So maybe I'm reading into that too much, but I think all 3 of us, should be able to deconstruct our faith and still have it. And so them being able to take hold of that word and like make it theirs. So to deconstruct one's faith means that you're going to lay it aside because it's you find out that it's not worth anything.
Right.
And so I don't appreciate that they got to kind of claim it in a certain degree, in a negative sense. Does that make sense? And maybe that's unfair. I don't know if that's. No, I don't think that's necessarily what they meant.
Fair. There is some intentionality there, Abby. So I think keep going. Keep going. That's fair.
My anger is just
righteous anger.
But not at them. I want to make that clear. I mean, I still really enjoy their shows, and I did appreciate that they were willing to be very honest and open about their beliefs. I think that is a key and important thing to do. I wasn't angry at them per se, but I am angry at some of the actions, I guess, and So
Yeah.
anyway.
Hey friends, thanks for watching the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to say, if you're someone who's looking for insights, ideas, and inspiration that will fuel your faith for the 21st century, then make sure you sign up for our weekly newsletter, Harvest Highlights. It's free and it's loaded with resources that will help you be a disciple and make disciples in the everyday places. So make sure you check it out. There's a link in the description of this video. Back to the show.
Let's get into maybe a clip. Can we go ahead and check something out here?
Yeah, we can. So, as they're telling their story, Rhett in particular anticipates that people who still do hold to faith and who do still believe are going to respond to this story, his story of deconstruction, in a particular way. So let's watch that first clip, Zach.
And when people say you changed because of LA, those things hurt a lot because of how untrue I know them to be.
So there's an aspect, and I will get into more of this.
Okay. Well, we were hoping that there'd be a little bit more there.
We can work with that, right?
But I can sort of fill in the gaps there. So basically what he says is that, he knows that people are going to have two statements. That they're going to, Christians who are holding to their faith are going to basically say, well, here's what happened. You moved out to Los Angeles and you lost your faith. Or they're going to say you were never truly a Christian to begin with. So those were the two responses that he anticipated, and I'm sure he's gotten, to him telling his story of leaving the faith. And so what did you guys think about, him anticipating those two objections, and what was your take?
You first, Abby.
Oh, okay. I think the statement about LA, like, I got that. I totally understood how he felt there, and that he was feeling sensitive, and that he was going to be made into a caricature, and probably growing up in the South, and in a very sheltered Christian environment that he did, I'm sure he heard about people going off to, LA and like some liberal place, and lost their faith. So I'm sure he was very sensitive about that, and I get it. And I was really fine with him kind of wanting to make it clear that this was a longer term thing. And also, I think that makes the most sense. That these, like, when we start to let the little tiny sins and the little tiny doubt start to creep in, and we really nurture it instead of really going hard at it in a defensive way, then yeah, this is what happens. And sure, it all came to a culmination when they were living in LA, but I agree with him that it wouldn't have just all happened like overnight. These things don't happen overnight. So I really appreciate that, because it's a great picture for all of us to see and to maybe take note of in our own hearts and our own minds, just what's going on, not to just be a passive observer or even a passive worshiper, that we do have to be a really active part of our faith. And I think that is really clear in his story. And what was the other part? There's another part to that. You want to respond to that? Well, I think.
Yeah, I think I will say for me, I believe truly with all my heart that they were genuine about their faith at some point in their life.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I would say that. Like, I wouldn't attack the fact that they said they were Christian and devoted to Jesus. From everything I've heard about them and from them, I have no reason to say that's not true. But with that, I do think that, like Abby was saying, this started way before LA, and it started way before, before they became these, world-renowned YouTubers. And there's a verse in the Bible that says, if you draw near to God, draw near to you. And it seems like there was a long period of time where they stopped drawing near to God, and it only makes sense that they got further away from God. So, myself, Zach, our tech guy, we both came out here to San Diego when we weren't following the Lord. And man, you can look at the last 5 years, and I would say that we've only gotten closer to the Lord being out here in California. So I don't think California is the place where you come and like lose your faith. But I do think that that was their chance to have their freedom and to act on all of the things that they were wanting to act on. Like Andrew said, them finding themselves. So.
Yeah, Abby, did you remember your point?
Oh, actually, it's perfect. Keith totally responded to just them saying, like, you're not going to believe that we ever did believe that we were ever, really had a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you just said, Keith. That it seemed like it was very sincere, and I think all the more of us taking into account how our faith continues and how it's a constant evolving thing. And so we just want it to evolve in the right direction.
And yeah, bro, I'm sorry. There was a Judas who had, walked with Jesus, the living breeze with Jesus. We know how that ended. There was a Peter who was his chosen disciple that had this big blunder at the end. There's his mom who was prophesied to. There were so many people. It is possible to walk with Jesus and walk away from Jesus. And I think that's the reason Jesus said, take up your cross every single day and follow me. Like, we have to choose him every single day.
Yeah, that's
Preach.
really good. Well, we got some other clips, so let's keep going here, Zach. Let's do that second clip.
I was trying to be as honest as I can when I tell my story, but I also kind of want to be the hero of my own story, don't we all? And in telling the story, I'm also telling it in a way that justifies my decisions and my conclusions. And there's really no other way to live life in one sense, but that can be also done in a...
Yeah, I thought that was this was actually a video that they produced. They did the 4-part series on the lost years, and then about a month later, they did another hour-long video where they were reflecting back on that conversation, that series, both the responses that they had received, but also, they had a little bit of space between telling the story, and now he's reflecting back on how he told his story. And I thought this was a very self-aware statement by Rhett that, first of all, he understands that it's a story. It's a story that's being told. And the details of that story are pretty simple. He started out identifying as a Christian. He no longer does. And there was a process that involved him going from A to B. But there's also the way that the story is told. And since he's telling it, he's going to tell this story in a way that justifies the decisions he made and the actions that he took. And that's very much in our human nature to do. So I thought that was a really self-aware statement on his part. But I think it's also, there's an important element of truth there that stories are powerful. And really our faith, our lives are built on stories, the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we listen to from others. And so really part of what we're wanting to do today is we're wanting to respond to his story the way that he told it, because and not to dishonor him, but just to say that, yes, the story is what it is, but he told it in such a way that he would be the hero coming out of that story. And the way you do that is, like you said earlier, Abigail, you find fault with Christianity, that both he and Link went through a process where they reevaluated the Christian faith, and they found it deficient. They found it wanting, and that's why they left it. And so we want to respond to the way he told that story, because we also have evaluated the Christian faith in our adult lives. We don't find it deficient. We don't find it wanting. And so that's what we'd like to respond to.
Yeah, and if you know Rhett and Link, you know that someday a whale is gonna die. So, I don't want to seem like we're just crushing these guys, because we're not. We really do have a lot of respect for them. And like I said, we were and still are like fans of these guys. And but you do say, I think Andrew told me really early on when we met each other that he didn't want notoriety to get the best of him, because we all want that. Like, we all want appreciation and to be acknowledged and thought of as good people, and we want to do good things. But Andrew also told me that God's not going to share his glory, so at some point you do got to choose where that credit goes and where it comes from. So I think he made a powerful statement, and one that's very true. We are gonna suffer with that, but or struggle with that, but we want to give it back to God because we know what God's done.
Yeah, that's so true, Keith. And as I was listening, and maybe this is why I got so mad, is I could really see some things about them that are similar to myself. And, just to be, completely honest, anyone listening who is a fan of the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3. And I knew that I was a 3 because when I read the little synopsis, it was exactly when I share my testimony. It's the first part of my testimony without Jesus. So basically, when I share my testimony, I say, there was a time in my life when I was mean and all I cared about was being the best, the smartest, the funniest, and like the center of attention in the room. And I would do literally anything to get it. And then I met Jesus and he changed me. And I just thought about them, and they tell their story and about how they were entertainers and how they would MC events and in their Christian organization, and they would do Christian camps, and they were always on stage and performing, and it's kind of where they learned their trade. And I really identified with a lot of that. I did similar things in college. I also emceed like every single like college night at my church, like that. I had those kind of gifts and talents to be on stage, and I loved it. And I did enjoy being in the limelight. However, and I was a believer at the time. I'm not saying I wasn't, but as I have grown in my faith and as I've matured, hopefully, I've actually like shied away from things like this. So irony, I'm now on a YouTube show, but I genuinely am scared of it because I know my heart. And when I was publishing my book, I was really on the floor before the Lord of just like, please,
that's awesome.
Please do not let this be in my own glory. And so I agree with Andrew's statement there. Like, we have to be careful because we all want to be the hero of our own story. And honestly, we're our biggest idol. The worship of ourselves and our own dreams and our own aspirations, man, they get in the way, and our hearts are deceitful. So I don't know. I think a lot of it was I truly identified with them, and I knew where they were coming from and how slippery that slope is.
Right. I mean, for a Christian, for us, Jesus is the hero of the story. And that's just a non-negotiable, John the Baptist statement that he must become greater, I must become less. And I going back to something that Keith said earlier, I really, listening to their whole story, I did not interpret the timeline as they moved out to LA and they lost their faith. What I heard them describe was that in their mid-20s, they began to really wrestle with, what do we want to pursue most in life, and who do we want to be, and who do we want to be known as, and they moved to LA. So basically, as they're wrestling with, I believe that they made some fundamental choices in their mid-20s that didn't immediately cause them to renounce the faith, but it did put them on a path to pursue, and they made choices. One of their choices that they made from the very beginning, and we'll hear about this in another clip, was they made a choice to not identify openly as believers in any of their public content. In fact, Zach, let's go ahead and jump down if you can. Go ahead and play the last clip there. I've got it listed as clip number 6. It's the one in their interview with the real story.
To do that, it was very cool, Phil. And then a lot of those initial videos that we put on YouTube were videos that we made in that context. And we never made any videos that were overtly religious or spiritual. We did funny things, and then we kind of said things that made connections to them. So we could kind of take all those videos and just put them on the internet, and people would be like, "Oh, these are just funny, very clean videos." Yeah. So that's the real story.
Yeah, and
that's the real story.
The real story, and we kind of missed the very beginning of that clip. But basically, he's saying that, hey, any article that's been written about us over the last 15 years, they don't know the real story. The real story is that we actually began making videos when we were in full-time Christian ministry, and we were making these videos to train college students on how to share their faith. But even in those videos, the videos that they were making in full-time Christian ministry, they were very purposeful. It was a conscious choice to not have anything overtly religious or Jesus-centered or even Jesus mentioning in those videos. They would play those videos with the college students, and then in their real-time face-to-face interactions with those students, they would take principles from those videos to train the students on how to share their faith. Those videos were the first ones that they began to upload to YouTube. And like he said, no one who watched those videos would interpret that as those videos being religious. They would just say, hey, these guys are good, clean comedians. So that's a decision that was made all the way back when they were still in full-time ministry, that I think just got played out and amplified more and more as they moved to LA and as they grew in popularity with their channel.
This actually, I don't understand our notes really, so I'm just jumping around. But what this really kind of points out to me is something I noticed a lot, is just this need to couch their beliefs, and that they were constantly aware of how the world saw them, and how, they wanted people to think they were cool and to fit in. And that really started to bother them on a deep level. And there was one clip, and I don't know if we even have it here today, but I'll just tell you about it. Link was talking about how just interacting with someone who's a homosexual, and how he knew that in his Christian environment that, they would have just hated that person. And I thought, like, what? Who are these people? Like, I don't think that's actually how we are, So even that was, he had really already vilified his faith and the people of faith, instead of seeing, how we can love someone who is a homosexual and living in that world, who's not a believer. Like, of course, that person is living in sin. We all are when we're not with Jesus. So even those things, like, there was this real vilification of believers, of not really loving people well. And so, we want to kind of leave Jesus out of this, because that doesn't go over well. Instead, we're going to just make lighthearted videos. So there was always a little bit of shame involved, right? Like, I'm not reading into that. Like, there's this shame in relation to Jesus.
Oh yeah,
It's rough.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. You can see it a lot. I don't know how many more clips do we have, Andrew? Because I don't want to spend too much time.
We got maybe another 3.
More 3. Okay. Yeah. I'll save it. I just want to say I agree with you guys about the shame and what was going on. You can see these patterns. So for sure.
Yeah. But I think I do see the very beginning of their journey as the turning point. Because I think they present the story as they tell it is they started down this path and they had these doubts. And at every moment they were trying to hold on to their faith in spite of feeling like they were becoming more and more disconnected from it. But again, I really see the choice that they made in their early to mid 20s as the turning point, and then it just played out. And this thing about not wanting to be openly identified with Jesus, as they began this pursuit of notoriety and a comic life. Nothing wrong with that desire to be on YouTube and to be funny and to make people laugh, but I found it striking that they were unwilling to talk about their Christian faith or be identified as believers openly from the very beginning as very significant in what ended up playing out. I've got another blog post, and you guys hadn't seen this, but I actually found this. This was from their community, Rhett and Link community.com, and it's a discussion that took place back in 2010, 10 years ago. And this was when they were beginning to be big, but they still hadn't really exploded to the extent that they are now. But this was like this still is a fan website. You can go to it. And this person, Katie, posts and says, I heard from my cousin, you two are Christians. And I saw the books of the Bible songs that you two did with the guy who did up Veggie Tales. And she says, which you haven't posted on YouTube yet, ! And I was wondering if it were true. Are you two Christians? Please respond. So this is Rhett's response, because this was an interactive website that they had with their fan community. He says, yes, Link and I are Christians, and it's a big part of our lives and influences the nature of our content. However, our videos are not Christian, and this community is not for people of any particular faith. The work we did on the Bentley Brothers characters is for Phil Vischer's Jelly Telly series. It's not Rhett and Link content per se, and it shows up in a different place. We understand that a lot of people are passionate about their faith, and they want public figures of that same faith to take a stand or to let people know the deal.
Quote unquote.
But our focus is to make people laugh and bring some light into their lives through our videos. As a result, you're not going to see us directly address issues of faith through our comedy content. Also, we're not interested in getting into a long, drawn-out discussion about how we communicate our faith. So this answer is going to have to suffice. And I'm going to close this discussion. Thanks for the question.
It's heavy, man. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's heavy, man. Oh my goodness. Man.
Now, this is May 28th, 2010. These videos came out in January of 2020, but I want people to understand that it was a long journey, but there were some pretty significant and non-negotiable decisions that were already made, very early on in that journey, and then they played out.
See, that's the one.
It does make me sad.
Right yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay, it does make me sad.
I'm with you.
I do have feelings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. Sorry, go ahead.
This is the last thing I want to say on this, but this was one of the big things that stood out to me as they told their story. Even in this comment, you're not going to see us directly address issues of faith through our comedy content. And then later, we're not interested in getting into a long, drawn-out discussion about how we communicate our faith. Now, I just listened to 7.5 hours of content where they were very interested in discussing the contents of their faith. But it was, they did not mention Jesus from day one until they were rejecting him.
Yeah.
That was when they were ready to go public and talk about, in a very extended way, issues of faith. And that's why I say, for me, it's a story of them finding themselves, making decisions about who they really wanted to be, what they wanted to believe. And I think you see that even in this scenario of, when they were willing to talk about issues of faith and when they were willing to talk about Jesus. I think it's a pretty significant insight into the story of their spiritual deconstruction.
I mean, is it fair to one, it wasn't a discussion in the end. It was monologues.
True.
Like they got to go on their show and tell their story, and there wasn't anyone there as a believer to have a discussion with them. So it wasn't a discussion. It was them telling their story. So even then, they weren't discussing. They were just telling their story. And we also don't know how many people they talked to in those 10-year period where they were, struggling, and who they spoke to. That would be interesting to know. I do know that Rhett listed a ton of books that he read. And I kept wanting to yell at my phone, were you reading the Bible? Who was discipling you? These are the things that I wanted to know. I know you're reading this book on evolution, but what else are you doing? So I do think it's not even fair to say it was a discussion in the end, Andrew, right? I mean, it was just them being we're done, and here's the final product.
So I think in this context, the discussion was, the discussion that he was talking about maybe was twofold. There was a public discussion. He's acknowledging that, hey, some of our fans who have faith would want us to be public, to put out videos that directly address faith. We're not going to do that. And then also, there's a conversation that's happening in the comments. We're not interested in that either. And that's a conversation that they are actually now having in the comments of their videos. They're making Q&A videos with their audience. So there is a discussion that is going on, both publicly and through the comments, I would say. But I do want to press forward. We got a couple of other clips. As they talk about their faith, as they go back and try to explain, one of their concerns is that people are going to say that we were never true Christians. And in their view, they were. So let's watch this next clip, Zach, number 3, as they explain their early experiences with faith and Christianity.
And I think being involved in YouTube and becoming more part of the community and my world expanding, people think that it's that, oh, they moved to LA and they got liberal. They gave up their faith. I mean, well, you could also blame it on YouTube, because many years before, it's like, I mean, in a very good way, it expanded. The people in this, we didn't rub shoulders with anybody like in that before that picture. We were in our own little microcosm.
Yeah, it sounds like,
and we felt like we had it all figured out. And I took extreme comfort, and I think with the way that I worked, I really needed the comfort of knowing that, okay, I'm right. I'm safe because I'm right.
It tethered you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it made it scary to start to say, okay, I'm going to let go of this.
Yeah, and this was, to me, this was a common way that they explained the early years of their faith, which was essentially, hey, we grew up in, they didn't say this, but we grew up in cultural Christianity. We were never exposed to anyone different than ourselves. And therefore, we never really had a chance to investigate the claims of Christianity, both its intellectual claims and its moral claims, because there was never an alternative. And it wasn't until we got involved with YouTube and moved out to LA that we began to see a broader picture of life that began to call into question whether or not the Christian faith was true and worth following. So I've got some things to share on that, but Keith, did you see that, and what was your take on how they explained their early days of faith?
Yeah, I would agree. I think they were, I'm going to say they were sheltered, but they grew up in the Bible Belt, and even amongst their friends, they distinguished themselves as true believers and trying to walk with the Lord. But you really don't see that in their adult life. And we were talking about it earlier, but he was so adamant about being right, that, hey, I'm right, I'm correct about this thing. And some of the things they'll say throughout the video is that he gave up on being certain about things, like I didn't want to be certain about anything anymore. But here's Link, of course, saying that, hey, I'm right. Yep, this is the best option for me. So one of the things, Abby, I kind of agree with your anger. There was parts that kind of upset me, because something they didn't address was their net worth. And I looked into it, guys, and their net worth is above 5 million. It's above 10 million. It's above 15 million. It's above 20 million. If you get what I'm saying. So, yeah, I think that has something to do with it. That plays a big factor in it. Like, at some point in Jesus' life, he was offered all the kingdoms of the world and their glory if he would have just exchanged where he worshiped. If he went from worshiping God to worshiping, I think you see this exchange at some point in their life. They were about to break into a stratosphere that most people will never break into. And they did it. There was just some things that they had to change. So, I think that one, it beats my heart up, because, what can we gain? We can gain the whole world and lose our soul. I think it's in there. So, yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the sheltered childhood. I grew up in the Bible Belt as well, and in a Christian home in a very tiny conservative church. So it was very sheltered. We didn't have a TV until I was in high school.
Wow.
So I didn't even get to see like 80s and 90s movies until I was married. So like I just have, I'm super sheltered. When I did get to high school, however, I went to a public high school, and my parents were very wise, and they had really given me a firm foundation in the word. And so I was kind of thrown out there as a teenager. And, teenage problems are they're little problems, and it's in a little, environment. And so I was able to start to work through some of those worldviews and as a teenager. And so I could appreciate if you're already in your 20s like they were, and all of a sudden you're thrown out into the world, that would be even more rocking. So I do think that this might be the argument for allowing your children a little bit of freedom when they're still in your home. I vividly remember being on the phone with a guy that I was, kind of talking to or whatever in high school, and he was debating with me whether or not there were other ways to be saved. And I remember like holding the phone away. Back then there wasn't like a way to mute your phones. It was the olden days. And being like, Mom, like, what do I do? And I like was talking to my mom, like, as I was talking to this guy. So that was helpful. I had someone, there with me. But I was also getting to figure it out for myself. So I really do feel for them. Man, Keith, we're going back and forth. Like, I'm angry, you're sad, I'm sad. So all the emotions are there. Andrew, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
So I thought that this one was interesting because it's almost like they were trying to play both sides of this. I don't know if this was a conscious choice on their part, but on the one hand, they wanted to say, hey, people are going to say that we were never true Christians. And we know that that's not true, so that's hurtful. It's hurtful when people say that. On the other hand, both Rhett and Link, as they describe why they were Christians, both of them make it clear that they now look back and say, well, what else could we have been? We were brought up in this very closed system where we weren't exposed to people different than us or belief systems that were different than ours, when it was actually encouraged for us to be leaders within this setting. And as we moved into adulthood and began to ask harder questions and get exposed to a broader group of people, that's when we really found that Christianity wasn't worth believing, wasn't worth identifying with. And so, I mean, my thought on that is, well, it's really hard to consider yourself a true Christian at that point then, because you really haven't investigated it deeply and you haven't looked at other alternatives. And so I agree with you, Abigail, that I think one of the takeaways is, how do we raise our children so that they are exposed to different types of people, different belief systems, while they're still in our home, so that we don't just shelter them. The job of a parent is to protect and prepare our children for the real world. And so, yes, part of that is to shelter them and to protect them at a young age, but part of it is to prepare them. And part of that is to let them see that, hey, not everyone believes the way that we believe. Not everyone sees the world the way that we see it. There are very sincere people out there who have different views, but this is why we do believe it to be true. And so I think that that was a really interesting way for them to present their story, that it was of course natural for them. I tell a story, and Keith has heard this before, but if my first grader came home and he told me that he was in love with the girl who's at the desk across from his and that they're going to get married one day, I would not get nervous. I would not sit him down and say, well, listen, here's what you really want to look for in a wife, and you're too young for this. I would actually probably think it was very cute and kind of smile on the inside, but not be too overbearing on it, because I don't want to embarrass him. And the reason for that is because we know that when you are young, you're not in a place where you can really make those decisions. You're not at a place where you can really weigh the consequences of this lifelong commitment. And so one of my takeaways from their whole story is that faith is a lifelong journey. And the story isn't over until it's over. And so if you start out as identifying as a Christian, but as you move into adulthood and you begin to pursue your dreams, Christianity no longer has a place in your life. Well, which version is the true you? I would say the true you is the adult version, and the version of you that was based in childhood is much more a product of your environment. And therefore you were not a true Christian, not as the Bible describes it. Now, you were sincere, and I think that's probably what he's saying, is that people are going to say that you were never sincere. I think they were absolutely sincere all the way up through college. I think if you had met them at the age of 21, you would have seen a very sincere person who identified as a Christian and was actively trying to live out of that identity. But as they moved into their adult lives and made choices about what they wanted to pursue most, who they wanted to be and who they wanted to be known as, it's pretty consistent from very early on that Jesus was not a central part of that.
Yeah, man, it's tough.
Let's watch one more clip, and then we'll probably wrap up with some takeaways because we're going to be coming up on an hour here. So
We're going strong.
Zach, let's watch that next clip number 4.
The more difficult it has become to have faith. In fact, for me, it has become impossible. And that was kind of the reckoning for me, right? That was jumping ship, to use a better analogy than taking off a bikini. You see, I kind of saw Christianity as this boat in a very stormy sea. It's stable. There's a lot of other people on it. It's got a destination. You're going to get through this. It gives you something to hold on to. It gives you stability. It gives you purpose. It gives you direction. And it gives you community. And when I jumped ship, I didn't jump to another boat. I jumped into the water. And I pulled my wife and my children in with me. I jumped into a sea of...
Yeah, Abby, what's your take on that clip? Uh-oh. I think we've lost your audio, Abigail.
Oh, there I am. Sorry, I had to mute myself because I have a little person who's like banging on my door right now. I don't know if you can hear it.
Nope.
But anyway, he's there.
So
yeah, I know. Anyway, I'm back. Sorry about that. Man, this is a very common worldview, that the world really isn't that scary and that awful. But this actually, this is something I was going to say about that previous comment, is that there's a lot of fear in a lot of Christian environments, a fear of the world. We do not have to fear it, friends. It is not to be feared. We have the truth. And we don't have to be afraid of the world. It's not going to just sneak up on us and attack us. We have choices. So I feel like because of the environment they were in, it did feel like they were on this little boat and it was them against the world. And then he finally got off of it, and oh, thank goodness, the world, it's so much better. And no one's coming at him with any kind of judgments. And thank goodness he got out of there. That's a real common misconception. Christianity is not us being on a boat. We are, what's a better analogy? Oh, I'm going to think of one. I was not prepared for this, but I'm going to come back at it.
That we're pilgrims and we're sojourners. I mean, we're walking through the chaos of life.
That's good. The Bible had a good one. Never mind. I didn't have to come up with my own.
And everybody is. So everybody's trying to make their way through life, and everyone is dealing. Like they talked about becoming comfortable with uncertainty. I don't feel as a Christian that Christian equals certainty. Not at all. I mean, faith is the confidence of things hoped for. It's not the certainty of things that are obviously clear. And so all of us are on this journey. All of us are in that raging sea. I agree with you that the way he's but that's his take. His view of Christianity was that it was this boat that was protecting them from the chaos of the world and from life, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I think obviously, the part about his family, I think it's at least cool that he was honest enough to say that his family was going to follow him, that he was the leader of his family, and where he went and where his faith went, eventually it was going to follow. Because if you listen to the videos, it seemed like his wife had a really hard time with it all and trying to let go, But eventually, bad company corrupts good morals. I hate to say it, but eventually, you're gonna, if I spend enough time with certain people, it's just gonna happen. So, I think it makes sense that his family went with him.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the power of story, and really owning that our stories do have influence, and taking a stand does have an impact, for good or bad. People will be influenced by our lives, either to be drawn to Jesus or to be drawn away from him. And part of a theme that came up over and over throughout their videos is hey, we're not trying to convince anybody. We're just telling our story. This is our story of how we weighed Christianity and found it wanting. And that's a bit of a cop-out, because you are going to influence people, and the fact that you're putting it out in public, and that's fine because that's what you believe. But then you don't get to say like, hey, we're not trying to influence you. We're not. I mean, your own family, your own wife and children. Obviously, those are the people closest to you, and like he says, like, hey, I pulled my wife and my children out of Christianity and into this raging sea. Another thing that he says in that clip at the beginning is that we kind of missed the very beginning of it, but he says that he didn't find it insignificant that the deeper he dug into Christianity, the more unbelievable it became to him. And again, that was also a theme, is that, hey, as adults, as we really began to examine the faith, at each step, we found the faith wanting. And again, that's a story. That's not truth. Truth, it's not reality that the faith, if you weigh it, you will find it wanting. That's his story. I was up in San Francisco a few months back. We did a podcast episode on Francis Chan's We Are Church home network, and I spent 4 days with a guy named Rob, who had a very different upbringing than Rhett and Link. Grew up in the inner city, among gangs, in a very broken societal situation. Spent 10 years, committed crimes, spent 10 years in prison, came to faith in prison. And now he would say just the opposite. He would tell a story that was the exact opposite of this story that Rhett is, that, hey, I've been on the other side. I've been in the world. I've seen what there is that's out there. And as an adult, I came across the teachings of Jesus and Christianity and found something worth giving my life to. And you won't hear from him because he's working with drug addicts and homeless people in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So, he's going to be influencing at a different level. But the power of story and our responsibilities to influence others is one that I think we just have to take ownership of. You can't tell a story and then say, hey, don't critique this story because it hurts me, or this is just my truth. I'm not trying to influence other people, because they're too smart. They're too smart not to know that it will absolutely influence people.
I hate the whole "this is my truth." Guys, there's just truth. There's just truth. Like, there's truth and then not truth, and then there's opinion. Ugh, it upsets me. That's a real, like, modern, current day, like, statement of, like, I'm just speaking my truth. Mm-hmm. Like, that's your opinion. That's opinion. That's what we call opinion, actually. Sorry, that's just a personal, like, pet peeve of mine. I love that, your spin on this, Andrew. It's not a spin, but your takeaway is that we have a story and it's important. It makes me very sad that we had these two gentlemen who decided to not share their story of faith when they had it, so to speak, and didn't feel like that was an important story to tell, but they did want to tell their story of non-faith. But we as believers, we all have the opportunity every day to tell our story. And our faith should be so important to us. We truly have life everlasting, a life of freedom that we can offer to others. And we should never be afraid to share it. And it should never be lower than our fame or our fortune or whatever else. It should always be 100% number one. And stories are powerful. And I love that you shared that, Andrew. Their story is powerful. It made me quite uncomfortable. So I would love to see more true stories out there of people of influence.
Yeah, stories that support the truth. Well, we got to wrap this up. Any final takeaways from you guys? Keith, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think real quickly, like to just, I guess, I don't know, summarize my thoughts the way I'm feeling, the way I took this all. We're, like Andrew talked about the guy up in San Francisco, we're the same way. I'm not going to say we're nobodies because we are somebodies, especially in Jesus. But, we don't have this huge platform. And, Rhett, I don't know if you'll ever hear these words of mine or of ours, but, what can you offer in exchange for Jesus? He said that you're out to sea in this boat and, man, you have everything in the world that you want. You're a very rich man. I don't think you brought that up too much in the podcast, which I think is worth hearing, because most of the people who consume your content, we're not rich. We're never going to be rich, but we do have this hope that Jesus has given us. And after hearing your synopsis and everything you've said about deconstructing the faith, you offered absolutely nothing to the average men and women out there. I mean, in exchange for Jesus, you pretty much said, hey, I'm on the waters now. I'm not going for certainty. I don't need it. I'm actually seeing a therapist now. And like I said, I'm not trying to attack his character personally, but it's like, what do you have to offer now? Like, all three of us have tasted and seen that there's nothing better than Jesus, and we're going to stand by that. So I'm not saying that when you leave the faith that you have to offer something better, but I'm just saying that as a man who's tasted and tried different things and lived most of my life away from Jesus, I think it doesn't get any better than Jesus. And if there's any debate about, I would love to hear what you have to offer in exchange for that. So,
Abigail, how about you?
Oh man, I don't know. That was really great, Keith. I don't have anything better than that. Honestly, I think I am glad that we were able to have this content to go over with you guys who are listening, because they're not unique. Rhett and Link are not just the only two people that this has happened to. So their story is not unique. And I think it's an important thing for us as believers to realize that there are people every day who are choosing to walk away from Jesus for lots of different reasons. But the truth is that when sought after with our whole heart, and when we make him the king of our life, then, like Keith said, we have something that no one can take away. It makes me very sad that in the end, these two gentlemen chose, I guess, fame and popularity in a certain, I'm not even going to say that. Let's just say they did not get wealthy, because there's a lot of people that are not super wealthy. That have given up their faith. What I will say is that we all have to fight sin on a daily basis, and it's not fun and it's not comfortable. And there is a lie that tells us that if we just give up this whole religion thing, we give up on Jesus, then it'll just be a relief. Won't have to fight anymore. I could just go with my sin. Well, that's a lie, because God is good. And he is ultimately better and worth the fight. So I think that really is the bottom line in their story. And it makes me angry that they have 5 million people that got to hear their convincing argument, but also makes me very sad and sad for them.
Yeah, I really found, like I said, I found their story fascinating. I really did. I think as believers, there's a lot to learn from the story that Rhett and Link have shared with us about their lives. So many important takeaways. And you know, one of them is that we're all in process. So, you know, faith is not something that it's a one and done thing. You know, like Abby was saying earlier, that faith is a daily choice that we make. And the story that is being told through our lives, we're still in process. We're in the middle of this story. And so to continue to take up your cross daily, like Keith was saying earlier, and to live that faith, there's nothing that we have to be afraid of. You know, you can question Christianity, both its intellectual claims and its moral claims, and you should. You know, the story that they both told, Rhett and Link, Rhett basically said that the intellectual claims did not hold up under scrutiny. I disagree, and there's a lot of really intelligent people who have done that same research and disagreed. And Link basically said that it didn't hold up under its moral claims, that it was judgmental, and that it ultimately didn't result in loving people. I disagree there too. So I think you should investigate your faith as a mature adult, and you should take ownership of your faith, and also ownership of your story, that your story does have a lot of influence, both for your own journey and for the lives of those who are around you. And we don't need to have 5 million followers on YouTube to be influential. All of us are very influential in our own networks and within our own circles. So definitely take ownership, do that research, be committed, model faithfulness, and live out your faith in the everyday places of life, because that's where it really counts. So I mean, I want to thank everybody who has stuck with us. If you're still listening or watching, kudos to you. Just realize we watched several hours to try to condense it.
This is the least you guys can
do. We're really long on this episode, but it's because we did want to do justice to the story that we listened to. If you haven't already and you find this kind of content about living your faith motivating and helpful, then definitely subscribe. Share this video with others if it's been helpful to you, with friends, and hit the notification bell so that we're putting out new videos every week, and we would love for you to see those and not miss any of those. So make sure that you do that. Guys, thanks for being on the show today.
Of course.
We'll do it again next week.
We'll be here. See you guys later.
See ya.